your presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. I will start with yeah, there we go. A quote of a little book I picked up recently. The title is "Don't Believe Everything You Think." And the 2 points he makes that are most important for any discussion these days is that most of us, if not everybody, seeks to confirm, not to question our ideas, and that we tend to oversimplify. I put this book forward because the date is important. 2007 was before the financial crisis. And a few weeks ago, the Independent Evaluation Office of the IMF came out with their story of how the institution failed to warn and to prevent the financial meltdown, 2007-2008. And they talk about a high degree of groupthink, they talk about a general mindset, and they talk about intellectual capture. And a debate like we have today, I think we should not forget some of those conclusions. Last year we had the summit on the MDGs in September. The good point was that there was some good language on gender equality, on equity, on financial transfers, the Robin Hood tax. That was so good, but it's good, but it was the same old discourse. And a good measure of success of those meetings is the brevity of the outcome document. And there they rather failed the test. The document is 4.5 times longer than the original Millennium Declaration was. And if you add up all the commitments heads of states make in that document, that was last September, they add up to 124. So this is quite something. It's the old discourse, and the old discourse is that if we can only accelerate economic growth, increase foreign aid, and improve governance, everything will be fine. Yeah, that's the conventional view. The unconventional evidence is a bit different. It is that the growing inequalities within countries, a trading system and an intellectual property rights system that is not fit for purpose, and climate change, which we are discussing today, all create severe jeopardies for future progress. And is not going to make us reach the goals by 2015, and certainly not later on. And when it comes to climate change, the danger is, as has happened with the MDGs, that the debate on the climate change will become captive of what the IMF called groupthink and a donor-centric mindset. And the two criteria for that is that when the debate becomes dollarized and when the debate becomes donorized. And we saw that last September on the MDGs, when the headline news was that $40 billion had been mobilized for child and maternal health. As a staff member of UNICEF, former staff member of UNICEF, I can only applaud that, but that was a fig leaf, a $40 billion fig leaf to cover the lack of courage and resolve by world leaders to really take the MDGs seriously. Then Cancun happened, and the headline news was, what was the amount? $100 billion, right? And it was the same story. And we have to be careful that we are not repeating those things by dollarizing and donorizing the issues. We saw that yesterday in this government, in this country as well, where the budget talks about reducing the taxes on fuel. What is it, 4 pence? It's not much, but at least that. Instead of letting the market play its role to make a change in our behavior and to make alternative sources of energy more competitive and more attractive, we go back to status quo ante. And it's not only in the UK, where I live in Belgium, the same thing is happening. They are cutting taxes on fuel prices so that we don't change our behavior. And talking about transfers of money from the north to the south is not actually about climate change. Climate change is about us here. So I will only talk, my colleagues will certainly talk more about climate change. I will talk about the first one, the within country inequalities. And I put an example here on Nigeria, data for 1990 and for 2008. And you see that in 1990, 47% of the children were immunized against measles. 18 years later, it was 44%. It had dropped by 3 percentage points. That in a period where all of sub-Saharan Africa, including Nigeria, had seen an increase by 17 percentage points. So it's pretty scandalous. But that aggregate figure, 44%, does not begin even to describe the tragedy that befell the people of Nigeria. Because if you disaggregate, as these quintile bars do, look at the red bar. The red bar, the top quintile, continue to see an increase in its coverage of measles immunization. The second quintile, the blue one, also saw an increase. The middle quintile, the green one, stabilized it. It is the bottom two quintiles that saw a total collapse of their coverage rate. And that's one country on one indicator. But it may be stark, but it exemplifies the general story, that countries, even if they are making progress, the progress is not inclusive, the progress is not equitable. And we already knew from 1996, 15 years ago, from the British Medical Journal, the editors there, who wrote this one. They said what matters in determining mortality and health in a society is less the overall wealth of that society and more how evenly wealth is distributed. And Nigeria, of course, just confirms this as we speak. But I do not want to dwell on the negative. There are examples where it can be done differently. Although there are few, Bangladesh reduced its under 5 mortality rate by half between 1994 and 2007. A massive reduction and a very equitable reduction. You see that most of the decrease in under 5 mortality went to the bottom quintiles. Malawi the same. Malawi also more or less reduced its under 5 mortality by half between 92 and 2006. And again, a much improved social picture. And so these countries seem to confirm what the spirit level says, book issued 2 years ago, that there is no one policy for reducing inequality and another for raising national performance. Reducing inequality is best for doing both. Now, those children have been reading all there is on the MDGs, including all the ODI reports. And they have figured out what the real meaning of the MDGs are. They have been told that MDGs stand for Millennium Development Goals, but for the remaining 5 years, they have discovered that the secret meaning of the MDGs is minding the development gaps. It is truly, in my belief, if we are not going to stop overlooking the fact that the progress that we are making, and we are making progress, but that progress is inequitable and is bypassing the bottom 40, 60% of the population in most countries, we are never ever going to meet that. And I believe that climate change is related to that. When you make that point, the next question is, yes, but how do we improve equity? Tell us, how do we do that? And I'm reluctant to go in there, and I will tell a bit of a historical story there. I'm taking you back 400 years. And I'm taking you back to South Asia, to the Mughal Empire, where there was the Mughal Shah Jahan, lived in the 17th century, and he was married, happily married, and they had many children together. And when the 14th child was born, she died in childbirth. The wife died, and the fellow loved his wife dearly. And what did he do in terms of consoling his grief? He built the Taj Mahal. That's one thing. A bit later, about at the same time in a different country, this woman, Queen Ulrika Eleonora, Queen of Sweden and Finland, also in the 17th century, had 7 children herself, didn't die of childbirth, but saw many of her friends and colleagues die around her. She was also faced with maternal mortality. And her reaction to it was not to build a temple or a church or whatever. She was the one who established the first ever recorded school for midwives in the world. That was her reaction. And in those days, of course, there was nobody around to advise her and to advise the Shah in the Mughal in New Delhi how to approach those problems of child mortality. Today, it's not far-fetched to imagine that advice would turn in the favor of the Mughal, because the Mughals' approach is investment, whereas her approach is consumption. The approach of the Mughal could be labeled as an attempt to increase tourism, foreign exchange, and economic growth, which eventually will reduce maternal mortality. And whereas her approach would be, you only create more opportunities for waste and a bloated public sector. But fortunately, she didn't have that in those days. But I'm making this point here that you have two countries faced with the same problem. You have two leaders faced with the same problem, maternal mortality, having very different reactions. And my point is that the MDGs and climate change is not about external forces triggering change. Fundamental transformation can never come from the outside. It can only be endogenous from inside the society. As outsiders, we can try to nudge somehow that transformation to happen. But I am very skeptical that lessons learned in one country are good to know. That's good for ODI to do and for other think tanks. But the mistake we often make is that we overestimate the replicability of those lessons learned and those advice. And then we start off by giving a whole set of recommendations. What is my proposal for the post-2015? Restructure the MDGs, definitely, including the 7th goal on environmental sustainability. That has to be radically changed. Formulate them more clearly as collective targets, north and south. Definitely that has to be changed in a major way. Stress their measurability, not their perfectibility. Don't throw in things that are not measurable. Capture the equity dimension, as we just discussed. Include interim targets for political accountability, because targets that only are coming due in 25 years do not generate much political accountability on the leaders of today. And focus on ends, not on the means. That comes back to my avoidance of giving strategic inputs in how do you get there. This is something to be approached. And then we need a new approach to global summitry. Global summits happen. What do we see on TV? Heads of state give 7-minute talks at the General Assembly to half-empty rooms, and then they walk out. That's not really a dialogue. That's not really coming together. What I propose is the creation of a peer and a partnership, a set of high-caliber individuals. I will only name one to make it clear what we mean. It is, of course, Lula. He's looking for a job. He could be heading this peer and partner group, led by the South, not by the North. I hope that the post-2015 MDG set is not going to be another exercise in donorship, because let's face it, what we have today is very much the result of a donor-driven approach to development, and people who are able and ready to challenge world leaders and the conventional wisdom. By 2013, there will be another meeting in New York, and they can, by then, generate a set of options and proposals regarding the next framework based on wide consultations. They should come here to this room and listen to everybody here and do a bit of thinking as well. So and then beyond 2015, they could serve as a global custodian for the new set of targets that we'll have. Because without a global custodian, the international mutual accountability is not working. We do not have that mechanism in place. And if we can set up a group of maybe 6 or 12 maximum high caliber individuals, they can do that. And the final slide I have is regarding to the common agenda for development results, which is bubbling up here and there among donor countries as well. And I want to raise here a word of caution by using a statement made by one of the management gurus who wrote a bestseller book about 10 years ago. From Good to Great was his book, and then a few years later he wrote a compendium on that. His name is Jim Collins, and he wrote Good to Great and the Social Sectors, Why Business Thinking is Not the Answer. And in there he makes a daring statement, but I think we should be listening to it. He says that the assumption of a so-called fair exchange, which means that if we give you money, we are entitled to tell you how to use that money, is highly dysfunctional, is his description of it. And as we go into this debate of climate finance, we should be highly conscious that this management guru has looked at it before we did and has come to a pretty stark conclusion. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Jan.